Duck identification made easy. Today we're going to be going over the most common duck species that you can find in the lower 48 United States. We're going to look at males and females. We're going to mostly look at the males because they're going to be the brightest and they're easier to tell apart, but we will also talk about female plumage as well. Now I do want to mention that after they breed, some of the males of these species do go into something called eclipse plumage for a little bit, where they look a little bit more like the females before getting those colors back. So that's just something to keep in mind. Additionally, we'll have range maps for most of these species, but always take the range maps with a grain of salt because they're never 100% accurate. It's tough to get a range map to be perfect. So take those with a grain of salt, but they are helpful. And then I'm gonna talk about vocalizations for only a few species where I find it the most useful. And this is gonna be broken up into 3 different categories. Our dabbling ducks, which are the ones that feed mostly near the surface. You might see them tipping down when they feed, so just the back end is sticking out and they'll be feeding under the surface. Diving ducks, which will actually dive down under the surface, and then sea ducks, which you can mostly find in the oceans and sometimes in bigger bodies of water when they're migrating through. So those are our 3 duck categories. Let's get into it with our dabbling ducks. To start off, we have probably the most common species that you will see and what people think of when you say a duck, which is a mallard duck. Males have an iridescent green head, bright yellow bill, white ring around their neck, gray body, and curly tail feathers. Females are more mottled brown, normally have an orangish bill that might have some black, pale face with an eye stripe. And a lot of other species look similar to female mallards. So this is a good one to know really well. Mallards can be found year-round in most of the United States, and they make kind of the standard duck quacking noise that I am gonna include because I hear it pretty often. And with the wild mallards, you will sometimes see domestic mallards, and this messes people up a lot because they see this kind of crazy looking duck. Sometimes they'll just have white on the front of their chest, they'll be like blotchy, they'll have weird feathers on the top of their head. You get a lot of domestic mallard hybrids, and ducks hybridize a lot. So you will see variations of these birds that are just hybrids, but looking for domestic mallards with your more wild mallards is something good to be familiar with. You sometimes also get other ducks like Pekin ducks and other domestic species kind of mixed in, especially if you have some really tame local waterfowl. So it's good to familiarize yourself with what all of those kind of domestics look like so you don't think you're seeing something super rare when it's a domestic mallard or something like that. Next up, we have the American black duck, and this one looks similar to the female mallard with some differences. So both sexes are going to appear similar, dark brown overall with a purplish wing patch, paler face. Males may have a slightly yellowish bill. And they're primarily found in the eastern US, especially in coastal marshes and inland freshwater areas during migration in the winter. So sometimes you'll see these mixed in with mallards. They will hybridize with mallards too, but they're gonna look especially dark compared to your female mallard. So if you see one that you're just like, that looks really dark brown, look to see if it might be an American black duck. They're normally hanging out with the mallards. Sometimes you'll see a couple of them in a group, but that's a good one to look for in your groups of mallards. And you may have seen them before and not even known because they're so similar. And very quickly, while we're here, we're going to talk about 2 other species that you may run into that look similar to female mallards, but they have more limited range, and that's the mottled duck, which you can find in the Gulf Coast. So in some of those areas, mottled ducks are more common than even mallards. Mallards don't necessarily go in all of those places. And then Mexican duck, if you're kind of on the US-Mexico border around the Texas-Arizona area. So we're not going to talk about those too much. That could be probably a whole nother video about differentiating those species. But you live in those areas, make sure to watch out for those. Next up, we have the fan favorite wood duck. And in their breeding plumage, males and females are kind of hard to mistake. The males are going to have an iridescent green crest, red eye, white lines on the throat, a really colorful chestnut and tan body. Females are gray-brown with white speckling and a bold white teardrop eye ring. So they can normally be found in wooded swamps, rivers, ponds in the eastern US and the Pacific Northwest. And I find wood ducks to be especially skittish. So sometimes they'll be walking through a wooded area, there's just a little water there, and you'll hear them take off before you even knew they were there. Sometimes they'll be a little more cooperative and feed out in the open, but they do seem to hang out in those actually wooded areas more than other duck species will. Their vocalizations, they make some ooh-eek kind of noises and whistling. So this is a good one to know because you will hear it as they take off. Moving on, we have the Gadwall. And this is one of the more drab ducks on the list. Males are kind of a gray-brown with black near the back end and a white wing patch. Some people say you can only see this in flight, but I've seen it on birds that are sitting on the water too. You can see a little white patch. And that's kind of what I look for when I think about Gadwall, is if it looks kind of gray, brown, drab, and you see that little white patch on the back end of the bird, that's very distinctive for picking out Gadwall from other species. The female Gadwall looks similar to the female mallard, but is a little bit plainer and has a thinner, darker bill. And Gadwalls can be found across most of the US, especially during the migration, but they breed in the northern prairies and winter in southern states. Next up, we have the northern pintail, and the males are very beautiful. Females are beautiful too, but in a more subtle way. But the males have a chocolate brown head, white neck, and a long pointed tail with a blue bill. Females are more mottled with a slender neck, and they're pretty elegant. But the males are really distinctive, especially with that long pointed tail that even if you just see a silhouette, you can normally identify northern pintails just by their shape. They breed in the northern prairies and Arctic tundra and winter in a lot of the southern US wetlands. Moving on, we have the northern shoveler. And they have a really iconic bill shape. So the males have a green head, sometimes they can have some purple iridescence, a really big spatula-like bill, white chest, some brown on the sides. Females are mottled brown, but they still have the large orange bill, so it's pretty easy to tell male and female just by the bill shape and the size. They breed in the northern plains and in the west, and they winter across the southern US and coastal areas. And I normally start to see shovelers in Wisconsin, where I live, in the early spring. They'll kind of come in with the teal, which we'll get to in a second, and they kind of all arrive together. So you can look through flocks and pick out the shovelers by that bill shape. Next up, we have the American Wigeon. Males have a brown body with a pale blue bill, white on their crown, and a green eye stripe. And then females have a grayish head, a warm brown body with a bluish bill. And in flocks of widgeons, you should always look for Eurasian widgeons, which have a more reddish brown head. It can be hard to tell sometimes, but if you do see one and it has that bright color on the head, it'll look basically like an American widgeon, but just with red replacing the green. So that's a good rare bird to look for if you're in the United States. They breed in the northwestern US and Canada and winter in southern and coastal areas in the United States. But this is another one that kind of moves with the groups in the spring. So you'll see them with the shovelers, you'll see them with the teal. Sometimes you can get a lot of these species just in one group if you hit a good pocket of ducks during migration. Next up, we're getting into our teal with the blue-winged teal. Males have a gray-blue head with a bold white crescent in front of the eye, brown body with speckles, and females are mottled brown with a subtle eye stripe and blue wing patch that is visible in flight. So all of the blue-winged teal will have a powder blue wing patch, but males you can sometimes see green as well as the blue on them when they take off. They breed in the northern and central US, winter in the Gulf, around Mexico, and Central America. And they're especially small. I feel like teal in general are kind of smaller birds out of these groups, so they look especially tiny when you're out in the field. Moving on, we have the green-winged teal. Males have a chestnut head with an iridescent green eye stripe, grayish body, and a yellow patch near the tail. Females are small and mottled brown with a dark eyeline, and males and females do show green color on the wings. So even on the female, they look pretty brown. Sometimes you can see a little bit of that green patch on the wing. But for males, I always look for that kind of yellowish patch near the back end of the bird, and then of course the green coloration by the face. Next up, we have the cinnamon teal, which looks really distinctive, especially if you get a male in breeding plumage. They are striking cinnamon red with a red eye and a dark bill. Females are brownish and similar to blue-winged teal females, but with a longer, thicker bill. They're primarily in the western US, especially in arid wetlands, and they winter in Mexico and Central America. Sometimes they will stray into other areas, but they're also known to hybridize. So where I live, sometimes people will be like, oh, it's a cinnamon teal, and it'll turn out to be like a hybrid with blue-winged teal or something else. So you do have to look out for hybrids when looking for cinnamon teal in different areas. And the last duck on our list of dabbling ducks is the black-bellied whistling duck, which acts different than all of these other species. Both sexes look similar with a grayish brown face, bright reddish pink bill, pink legs, and bold black stomach with chestnut on the body. They have an interesting posture where they will stand very straight up, and they'll often be in large groups just hanging out in trees. in the water, on the grasses, all making this kind of classic noise. If you live in the South, you probably hear them flying over from time to time too, vocalizing, so this is a good vocalization to know. And in addition to black-bellied whistling duck, another one to look out for is Fulvous whistling duck, in with the black-bellied whistling ducks, but also just on their own. Both sexes look the same, but they have a more cinnamon, kind of tan body with a dark back, bluish bill, and white stripes on the flank. And something that can be confusing is young black-bellied whistling ducks have a more bluish bill, so they can be mistaken for Fulvous whistling ducks. So if you think you have a Fulvous, make sure that it's not actually just a young black-bellied whistling duck. And then mixed in with all of these species, you may find some rare vagrants from other places. A good one to look for is the Gargany. Sometimes they'll be seen with other species in here, so that's a good one to just kind of keep in the back of your mind to look for while you're searching through the dabbling ducks. Now let's move on to our diving ducks. So as we mentioned earlier, the big difference with diving versus dabbling ducks is the behavior. So diving ducks are more apt to actually go fully under the surface, and then you won't see them for a little bit and then they'll pop back up. So they can be kind of hard to look for because you'll see one and then it'll just be gone, then it'll pop up somewhere else. But let's start off with the Canvasback. They're found mostly in northern and central North America and have wintering populations in the southern US lakes and coastal areas. The males have a very striking deep chestnut red head and neck with a darker body and a bright white back. The bill is also very sloped, so it won't look like a regular duckbill. It'll look much more triangular than in other duck species. The females have some subtle browns, similar in shape to the male, but with a less vibrant head, but it still has that triangular sloping bill shape. So normally when I see canvasbacks, they're one of the brightest ducks out there, and it really stands out. It's like a bright paper white compared to some of the other species you'll see. So that, along with the bill shape, are good identifying features when you're looking for canvasbacks. One of the ducks they may be confused with is redheads, which we'll go through next. They have bright red heads with a black chest and a grayish body, and they have a blue bill with a dark tip. Females are more mottled brown with a pale rounded face, and they may have a slight red hue to the head, and sometimes it looks like they actually have an eye ring. Some of them do, some of them it just looks a little more pale. But they can be found in the interior of the United States and Canada, migrating to coastal regions in the winter. So the redhead is going to look more like your traditional duck, where the canvasback is going to have that sloping bill, breeding male is going to have the brighter white. And sometimes the head on the redhead is really hard to see, especially if you're looking at it when it's backlit or just at a distance. It won't necessarily look super red until you get a close look, and then you can tell that it has that red sheen. Next up, we have our Scaup, the greater and lesser Scaup. And these two can be hard to tell apart from each other, but let's start off with the greater. The greater Scaup normally has an iridescent greenish head in the males with a black chest, pale gray body with a white wing patch. Females are more mottled brown with a pale blue bill and a white patch near the wing, but they'll also often have white around the base of the bill. They can be found across the US, especially in coastal and inland waters during migration and in the winter. And the Scaup I feel like you can find on larger bodies of water or on the sea, so they could even be considered sea ducks depending on where you live. So in our lesser Scaup, they're smaller than the greater, with a dark head, normally has a purple sheen. In general, their heads will look thinner than in the greater, and you'll see that little peak on the back part of the head, and that's a good differentiating feature. Females are going to be similar to the female greater Scaup, with a smaller, slightly darker bill, and they also may have that white patch near the base of the bill. So in order to tell these two apart, using the head sheen color is tough because it doesn't always hold true. Normally greater has more green sheen, lesser has more purple sheen, but the head of the greater Scaup is going to look more front heavy, like it's more rounded around the front. And the bill nail, the little tip of the bill, if you can see it straight on, is going to be wider than it would be in a lesser Scaup. In lesser, they're going to look like they have a, like almost more a taller head, like it's not as blocky, and a little peak at the back of the head. So it'll look thinner and then it'll have that little peak. And then the bill nail on the lesser Scaup is going to be much smaller than it would be on the greater. And they do migrate at a little bit different times. So you can kind of know in your area what the expected species is, but they will intermix too. And in the flocks of greater and lesser Scaup, it's good to look for tufted ducks. They'll have a more defined, like actual tuft on the back of their head, but they look similar to the other Scaup species. Our next duck on the list is the adorable Bufflehead. They're one of these smaller diving ducks. Males have a small, compact body with white on the sides and a striking white head patch, and you can sometimes see iridescent green and purple on the head as well. Females are gray-brown with white cheek patch and are also very small. They breed in forested wetlands of Canada and Alaska, winter on lakes, rivers, and coastal waters across much of the US. And they can be very common and very active. So they'll be diving a lot, foraging, and you'll often see them in big groups depending on where you live. But pretty easy to differentiate. Males and females look fairly different than anything else and are very small. Next up, we have the ring-necked duck, which may be one of the worst named ducks because it's really hard to see the ring on the neck. But males have a dark head, might have a purplish sheen on it, a chestnut ring around the neck, which is really hard to see, and a blackish bill with a white marking and black tip. So I actually think the white marking on the bill is easier to tell on the ring-necked duck. You'll normally see black, gray, and then kind of that white. And some people have argued that they should just be named the ring-billed duck because that's a better differentiating feature than trying to see the chestnut brown ring around the neck. Females are mottled brown with a pale ring around their bill and have a similar shape to the males. They can be confused with lesser Scaup, but you can normally see the ID features to tell them apart. And they're found in freshwater lakes and ponds across North America, especially during migration and in the winter. So the ring-necked duck, you can almost think of it more as the ring-billed duck. Another one that it can be confused with the females is the female redhead because they also have a marking on the bill. So keep an eye out for that one when you're looking at female ring-necked ducks. Next up, we have another small duck species, the ruddy duck. Males in breeding plumage have a chestnut body, really bright blue bill, and a stiff tail that's often held straight up, which is a very unique posture to see. Females are brownish and they have a distinct dark line across their face. They breed in the prairie potholes of the United States and Canada and winter widely across the southern US, Mexico, and the coasts. And they do look different in the winter, so it's important to know winter and summer breeding plumage. But in the summer, that bill is really bright, their shape is really unique, and they're very compact. Moving on, we have the common goldeneye and the Barrow's goldeneye. And they're very similar with a few differences. The common goldeneye has an iridescent greenish-black head with a round white cheek spot, golden eye, black and white body. Females are grayish with a chocolate-colored head and a pale bill with a black tip. They breed in the northern forests and tundra of Canada and Alaska, winter on inland lakes, rivers, and coastal bays across the US. And then the Barrow's goldeneye looks very similar. Males have a purple-black head with a white crescent behind the bill as opposed to the little white cheek patch, black back with white spots. Females have a brownish head with a mostly yellow-orange bill. Sometimes you can have other colors on it, but it normally looks smaller, and a steeper forehead than you would see in common goldeneye. And Barrows can be found in western North America. They breed in mountain lakes and winter on the Pacific coast and some inland waters. So in flocks of common goldeneye, it's good to look for Barrows and vice versa. Sometimes they can be out of range, but on males, that marking on the face is going to be a big differentiating feature. And on females, looking at the differences in the slope on the forehead, steeper in Barrows with the smaller orangish bill is a good field mark to look for. But they can be kind of tough, especially if it's like one Barrows in a flock of 1,000 common goldeneye. Now let's move on to our 3 Merganser species. First up, we have the hooded Merganser. Males have a black and white crest that they could actually move up and down, brownish sides, and a really thin bill. So Mergansers in general have pretty thin bills. Females are brown overall with a messy, kind of rusty brownish crest. They're found year-round in wooded wetlands across the eastern US. Northern populations do migrate further south for the winter though. So they're a smaller species and they'll be mixed in with groups of other ducks. Sometimes they'll be on their own, but they will hang out in more forested areas sometimes compared to other species. Our next Merganser is the common Merganser. Males have a sleek white body with a greenish head, and there's a lot of contrast between the dark and the light color, and then a reddish bill. Females have a gray body with a rusty head, reddish bill, and a little line under the chin on the throat that's white. And that's a big differentiating feature between the red-breasted Merganser female, which we'll get to in a second. And they breed across the northern forests in winter in freshwater lakes and rivers throughout the US. But let's move on to our red-breasted Merganser. So the male red-breasted Merganser has a really shaggy green head, rusty colored chest, and a thin red bill. Females also have a rusty brown head. Their crest is a little more messy. They have a grayish body and a red bill. And they breed along the northern coast and boreal lakes and winter on coastal waters across the US. So in general, the female is going to look a little more messy as far as the head shape. and then they're not going to have as much white on the throat and on the chin as you would see in the female common merganser. The males look fairly different. The red-breasted has that, messy head pattern, where the common merganser is going to be more sleek. So those are our main diving ducks. Now let's move on to the sea ducks. As I mentioned, some of these could probably fit in the sea duck category, such as like the red-breasted mergansers, some of the goldeneye, because they will be out there on the coast, but also on the bigger bodies of water in the inland part of the United States. To start off, we have one of my favorites, the long-tailed duck, and they have really striking breeding and non-breeding plumage. So males in winter, when we normally see them, are going to have a striking white face, black chest, really long tail feathers, and gray sides to their body. Females are going to be gray-brown with a pale cheek patch and have a shorter tail. They breed in the Arctic, and they winter on deep coastal waters of the Atlantic, Pacific, and the Great Lakes. So when they're down here, we normally see them in winter, which they still look really cool. Their breeding plumage is also really cool, but just in a different way. And they're pretty unique. Males and females look quite different from each other, but they have a similar shape, except females are going to have the shorter tail, with the males having the really long tails. Next up, we have the Harlequin duck, which is another really striking species. Male Harlequin ducks are a really stunning mix of slate blue with white spots, chestnut kind of red. They're fairly small and compact, but pretty obvious if you're able to get a good look at a breeding male. Probably one of the most beautiful ducks in the United States. Females are dusky brown, and they have 2 to 3 small white spots on the face, and sometimes the young males can look similar to the females too. But they breed in mountain streams of the Northwest. They winter on rocky coastlines, especially in the Northeast and the Pacific Northwest. Sometimes they'll come to the Great Lakes, but they really like being in rough water. So they're okay if they're in an area where the water's just beating against the rocks. They're not that far offshore. They're totally fine to be in there. So sometimes they'll be in kind of the harsher water conditions. Same thing with the long-tailed ducks too. Actually, a lot of these sea ducks are okay with being in those conditions, but especially Harlequin ducks, they're okay with that really rough water. Next up, we have our Scoters. And they have the really distinctive shape of that elongated, interesting looking bill. So it's kind of similar to like you would see in a Canvasback, but even more stretched out and more goofy. It kind of looks like they just have a really big nose when you see them. And the males of all these species are brighter than the females, with some interesting coloration on their bill. Let's start with the surf Scoter. Males are going to be all black with a really large, colorful orange, white, and black bill, with white patches on the forehead and the back of the neck. Females are dark brown with 2 pale patches on the face. Females may look similar to the next species we're going to talk about, the white-winged Scoter, but surf Scoter females will lack any kind of white wing patch. Surf Scoters breed in northern Canada and Alaska and winter on the US coast in shallow marine waters, and will sometimes also show up in inland lakes such as the Great Lakes. Next, we have the white-winged Scoter. They breed in boreal Canada and Alaska, and they winter on large inland lakes and both coasts. Males have a distinctive white patch on their wing, which sometimes you can't see, but if you can see it, it's a good field mark. Long sloping bill with some reds, oranges, and whites, and a comma-shaped white marking under the eye. If you can see them up close, they're really, really beautiful. Females are brown and they have variable white patches on the face, and they're pretty large in size, but they will also have that white wing patch if you can see it. When differentiating between female white-winged Scoter and female surf Scoter, I feel like the surf also looks like it has a dark cap almost. So it'll look like it has really dark color here, and then you'll see the 2 white markings, where on the white-winged Scoter, it looks like it doesn't necessarily have that capped appearance. So those two can be a little tough to tell apart. And then finally, we have the black Scoter. They breed in far northern Canada and Alaska and winter mainly along the Atlantic and Gulf Coast, but they can also show up in areas like the Great Lakes. Males are entirely black with a yellow-orange knob on the bill. Females are brown and they have some distinctive markings on the face, differences in darker and lighter coloration that looks similar to the ruddy duck that we talked about earlier. But the Scoters are going to be larger with those sloping foreheads. That's a big difference between them and ruddy duck, but people do get the female black Scoter and the female or non-breeding ruddy ducks confused sometimes. And then we have a couple eiders to talk about. They're very coastal ocean species, although they will sometimes end up in different places. But the common eider is found along the northern Atlantic coast year-round. They breed on coastal islands and winter in large flocks offshore. Males are bold black and white with some pistachio coloration on them and that sloping forehead, very similar to what we see in the Scoters. Females are richly barred brown, and they're very large and bulky birds, but that bill shape is a really good thing to look for with the sloped forehead. And then we have king eider, which is found in the northern coastal regions, especially in Alaska and northern Canada during the winter months. Males look incredibly stunning with a black and white body, a bluish green head with some yellow as well, and females are mottled brown with a more subdued color pattern, but they're similar in size to the males. So they're very striking. Unfortunately, they don't live in a ton of different places in the US. And I also have the spectacled eider on here, but they're mostly found in Alaska. They do kind of look like they have spectacles, pretty distinctive face pattern in males and females. So those are the main duck species that you're gonna encounter. There may be some others, such as the Eurasian Wigeon, the tufted duck, maybe one of the eiders shows up, Gargony. So it's good to know these species really well. So if something rare does show up, that you can pick it out from the bunch. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. Make sure to look at our other videos about bird identification. And if you enjoyed, hit that subscribe button. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time on Badgerland Birding.